Welcome to our Solstice Edition. Woo. I'm Kirsten.
I'm Sam, and we're here today to chew the metaphysical fat. We didn't mess it up. Woohoo! Anyway, moving swiftly on. We've got a brilliant guest today. It's one of our friends. It's Michael Joy. He's a esoteric researcher, specializing in the ancient Egyptian mysteries. So should be fascinating. So without further ado, let's bring him on.
Hi, Michael.
Hey.
Hi.
So yeah, we're really thrilled to have you today. Esoteric researcher.
I know,
We can't wait to pick your brains. Obviously, before we get into all that, we just want to kind of know a little bit about your story for our viewers at home, just to kind of have a background in your awakening, how you kind of got to where you were, and that kind of thing.
I'll give you the quick version. I used to be a clinical systems analyst in healthcare, and I basically used to solve problems for executives. They'd say, hey, we want to know if we can do this kind of a project. And I'd have to run around and ask a bunch of people questions and figure out if we could install a new 8K video system in the surgery center or that sort of thing. And it was a lot of fun, but I used to work 3 people's jobs, and it was insane. And then I was leaving that work to become a therapist, and then I had a massive Kundalini awakening, which kind of changed all of that. And it shattered me into 1,000 pieces, and that's when I found the mysteries, the Western mystery tradition, and I used those teachings to kind of put myself back together. And I found the Egyptian path on the same way, and I found all the parallels between the two, and I realized that the Egyptian hieroglyphs were basically the Western mystery tradition in picture form. And I started overlaying them, and then fell in love with Egypt and moved there for about almost a year now total between several trips. And yeah, that's my story in about 2 minutes.
That's pretty good. You condensed that very well, I've got to say. Yeah. So, I mean, I really like what you were saying about how you figured out that the hieroglyphs that they're going out there in the end, are also corresponding to these esoteric mysteries. I mean, could you elaborate a little bit on that, or if we put you on the spot?
Sure. I started watching videos of John Anthony West's Egypt tours that I found online, and they tended to be 2 or 3 hours long. And when he would go over the teachings, he would bring in teachings from Gurdjieff or the Rosicrucians, and he would sometimes point out how they represented the same ideas. And I started noticing other pieces that I had noticed. And most of the places where you would find parallels have to do with the Hermetic teachings. I like the way Paul Foster Case refers to them. He calls it ageless wisdom, because it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Sumerian or Egyptian or the Indian cultures or where you go, really, the teachings are all the same. You know, you have the creative spiral, you have the snakes, you have the 2 pillars. And when you can find that symbology within the scenes that you're looking at, all of a sudden you can make sense of them. And they're no longer about the individual pharaoh or the individual queen. You can see, oh, this is a scene about the queen's initiation, and this shows her rank within the mysteries. She's wearing this crown, and this crown is gold, this one is a different color, so that shows, you know, she's achieved this level of enlightenment versus this level of enlightenment. And the longer you spend with it, the more basically that it makes sense. The pieces just sort of fall together.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like learning another language, isn't it? Like a language in a language. And it's really interesting that we talk about like hieroglyphs, because they're essentially like, it's just symbols, isn't it, really, when you look at it. And I know we've talked about the unfortunate before, but she's really big into like the nature of the symbol, and how when you actually go into it, it's a gateway to access higher realms of information that we probably we can't conceptualize on this kind of 3D physical plane. And I'm wondering if you feel like this is the same sort of thing.
Absolutely. The way that the Egyptians essentially look at symbols is that they're alive. And they look at the symbol itself as, well, just imagine my hand as a symbol. That's a symbol, and then when you take it and you make it a relief, so you push it out from a wall, it's essentially like putting the symbol on a platform and giving it even more depth and more energy and more prominence so that it pops out. And so that's, even though it's not necessarily detectable, when you're looking at a larger hieroglyphic scene, there will be certain aspects that are like the Pashent crown, which is the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. There are times when the upper crown, it's a joint piece, but there are times when the upper crown, the white color will be more prominent, and there will be other times that the red color is more prominent. So that's how you can tell, hey, this is a teaching, even though this person has both crowns, this is about materialism, or this is about the higher teaching. You can start putting these pieces together. So even if you don't know anything about what the scene is about, you can pull out a higher teaching from them because they put them in there.
Yeah, it's all kind of encoded. I like that. I also like the idea of it being pushed out because I've never come across that before. Have you come across anything like that before, Kirsten?
I haven't. No, I haven't.
So the old kingdom hieroglyphic scenes, they were recessed. The ones that we tend to see now are from the Ptolemaic era for the most part. The Greeks built them, the more recent temples. They're raised hieroglyphs, high relief. And so it's interesting because that means one is receiving the energy and one is pushing it out. And that's something that I haven't spent a lot of time with yet, figuring out which are which, but it seems to show a difference, a shift in perhaps in procession between an era of where the energy is more prominent and the energy is more passive. But certainly that's, something that's worth exploring. So there's all these different variations across the millennia that Egypt was a civilization that are reflected in the architecture and in the structures themselves, but they're mysteries to us because there's so much time that's elapsed.
Yeah, they are a mystery.
I wonder,
I'm sorry, Kirsten.
when you were talking about they're either pushing energy out or bringing it in, that's like masculine and feminine. So I'm wondering if that has to do with the shifting of the ages from the more feminine being predominant to the more masculine being predominant, because I know we're shifting now back into an age where the goddess is becoming more prominent again. And so maybe we can see a pattern there.
It could be the age of shifting from the age of Taurus to the age of Aquarius. I'm sorry, age of Aries, age of a moon, because Aries, of course, as you know, Kirsten, is going to be a fire sign, so that's going to be very masculine energy.
Yes.
Taurus would be more about receptive, more feminine energy, so that might explain it right there. So I know you wanted to talk about the sequence of pyramids and how they work with initiations and that sort of thing.
Yes.
So Djoser's pyramid at Saqqara was the first pyramid, and the way that we can tell that is the pyramids and the temples themselves were built in a way that reflects the evolution and the ascension of the Egyptian civilization, the Egyptians as a people. So as the civilization, as the people progressed spiritually, they would build another pyramid or temple to reflect that. And the capitals would change. Egypt itself was a reflection of the human body to them. So since Djoser's pyramid was the first real pyramid that was built, we know that was the first one that was used for that type of, for spiritual initiations and ascension related practices. So there's 6 steps, so we know it's associated with the number 6 and with the heart, with Tippereth, as some of them are. Of course, we know that spirituality is so much heart centered. So of course, so much of Egypt and the temples and pyramids were also. Djoser's Horus name, the Horus names help us determine the actual function of the pyramid itself. His Horus name was Necherket, which translates to divine of body or spiritualized body. So this would be the first place that an initiate would go on his path to becoming more than man. They would go to either a pyramid or a pyramid temple to receive the energy, to receive the resonance, and to open up. In the case of Djoser's pyramid, there's no actual physical axis mundi on the pyramid, which would be like the spine of the pyramid. And anytime we don't have something that's physical, it's implied, which means that it's spiritual. So there's an implied spiritual spine within this pyramid or jed. So by interacting with the energy of this pyramid, of Djoser's pyramid, it will it essentially aligns or spiritualizes the physical spine, the physical jed, and the spiritual jed. So, which is the first step of awakening, right? Is realizing there's more than just us, more to life. That that spirit is part of life too.
So do you feel like that's the kind of fusing of the etheric body, because that's the one that's closest to the physical body, isn't it? Is it kind of bridging that gap a little bit? I know when we had a quick chat before, we were talking about how it essentially resonates throughout the body, and you mentioned ringing a bell, and it kind of tied into what I'd learned in sound therapy. So obviously we can heal through resonance because everything's got a frequency, and that particular construction of the pyramid will resonate at a certain frequency, and that's what's bringing kind of that etheric body into alignment with the physical body, maybe.
Yeah, and with all of these things, we have to use sort of what we know from either India or the Western mystery tradition to put a lot of these pieces together. And the way that I understand it is, so many of these structures, it really is like ringing a body like a bell or like a tuning fork to elicit a certain type of reaction, whether it's physiological, spiritual, or psychological. And with Djoser's pyramid and with the name Necherket being like divine of body, it seems to me like it's like a ringing of a bell to remind, it's like a sudden reminder, hey, you're a divine being. And that's like your first step of realizing of your journey, it's like reminding a full body, head to toe reminding or reminder of who you are, and that there's more to search for about who you are.
That's really interesting. And I mean, do you know anything more about the practices that would kind of that you would do to kind of get this activation? Because I know we mentioned you either go and you either get an activation or you don't. Is it to do with intention, or do people just go there and have an activation and maybe not even realize it because they're just not as aware?
Do you mean nowadays, or do you mean in ancient times?
I'm talking about probably nowadays, but we can do both. We can do a comparison.
So nowadays, because these monoliths are built on sacred ground, even though many of them are partially, or in some cases almost totally in ruins, the ground itself still resonates with the energy. And because of the way that sacred geometry works with layering, where you're going to have certain shapes within certain shapes, and then columns in a certain number with certain proportions and certain materials, all of those layers work together in a way that it doesn't matter if you remove one of them or part of them, the other ones are still in place, and there's still pieces in the foundation that are aligned to cause magnetic currents in certain ways. So even though they're operating at a much more reduced capacity, people who are sensitive are going to have experiences there. And they aren't necessarily profound, because it depends on if someone has released most of their inner darkness and that sort of thing. They won't necessarily have. They could have a very pleasant experience. It's just kind of like feeling like you're buzzing a little bit, or like you can feel the resonance a little bit. It's quite pleasant. But if someone has done all of the work and say they're just waiting for something to initiate a release, and they go to one of these places, yeah, it's actually common for those folks. Or maybe somebody who has a block, and there's like, it's like a dam that's like one little stone that's holding the release from coming out. Certainly going to a place like that is going to stimulate the release. But the release is going to coincide with whatever the vibrations of the place are. Like if you go to Hathor's temple at Dendera, it's going to release, you're likely to get a heart release. If you go to the Great Pyramid, you're more likely to get like a mental type release. So the vibrations inside are very specific.
So I know we've spoken before about kind of the order that you do them in. Do you want to talk a bit about your journey and what you experienced when you went there?
Well, my initial journey was about healing my mind and myself, and I used the temples in Luxor to do that. I figured out the way that they were used to elevate consciousness in the old days. I had a lot of help from my spirit team, but and from past life memories and that sort of thing. But I figured out with all this help how the temples were used to elevate the mind, and essentially used it to recalibrate my mind and rebuild basically a stable version of myself back then. But when you're talking about going through the certain sequence of pyramids, I did that in January, and actually I can talk about that real quick if you'd like.
Yeah.
I
Yes,
normally,
me too.
I kind of can go where I want in Egypt, but there are other times where I'm very specifically told when to go places and when not to go places. And this last trip, I was specifically told not to go to places and to go in a certain sequence. And so I had already been to Djoser's pyramid, so I didn't need to go to that one. And so the next one in sequence that was built is Maidum's pyramid. So that one is one of the three pyramids built by Sneferu. And Sneferu means harmony in Egypt. And it doesn't describe the pharaoh's name, it describes the purpose of the three pyramids, which is harmony.
Right.
There's a common narrative that Sneferu built all three pyramids, but there's no way that, time-wise, that one person could build all three. So that pyramid at Maidum, which is the one that's all the way collapsed, that one is the next one in sequence after Djoser's pyramid. That one is called Jed Sneferu. So it harmonizes, it takes that spiritualization that happened at Djoser's pyramid and it basically harmonizes it with your spine. And it gives you a framework, essentially, a spiritual framework from which to build. So the first one activates you, the second one gives you the framework.
Right, okay, that's what I was just going to ask you, actually. The first one that she brings you online and the second one starts to move you in a direction. And obviously we know that the spine and the 33 vertebrae and all that, I don't know if there's any combination between that and any of the Egyptian mysteries. But that's your, like you said, your base, isn't it? That's where everything's going to move up and down.
Yeah. And it gives you a home base of sorts, a foundation of sorts from which to essentially develop a spiritual body. So from there you go to the red pyramid, which is called the Northern Shining Star. And after that you go to the bent pyramid, which is the Southern Shining Star. And the red pyramid is the root, and then the bent pyramid serves as the crown. So the three together, one harmonizes your crown, then your root, or your spine, then your root, then your crown. So you start out with this harmonized center going through the first four.
Which is really interesting because that kind of aligns with Kundalini as well, doesn't it? And how you would have well, most people have a rising from the bottom, don't they? Some people have a rising from the top, but yeah.
So I was getting guidance. I was told, go to the, and I was going through a purge at the time. And so the first few weeks I was there, I didn't go even to any sites or anything. I just worked on healing and purging. And I remember, Kirsten, actually, you recommended that I do a heart opener at just the right time when I was there. And that was when I let out the big darkness from inside. And once I let out that big block from my heart chakra, it was the next day they said, okay, go to Pyramid of Maidum. And then I would come back and I would have 1 or 2 days of rest, because after you receive one of these activations, you're going to sleep about 12 hours a day at least for 2 days. Usually it takes to sleep it off until you feel normal. You don't feel bad. It's just very exhausting. Your body needs to rest and recalibrate. And it'd be 2 days, and then they'd say, okay, now go to the red pyramid. And then 2 days later, they'd say, okay, go to the bent pyramid. And it was learning to work with them as temples. So I would fast beforehand for 12 hours, and I would go when I was completely clear with nothing but water and that sort of thing, making sure I'd slept beforehand. I wasn't using cannabis or any other type of stimulants, and so it was very enlightening to use the pyramids in the way that they were intended. And I have a friend there, an Egyptian healer friend, who I've spoken about him a few times on X, who has worked with the pyramids for several decades and knows all about them. And he's helped me quite a lot too on my journey with learning how they work as functional temples, basically.
So did you get a lot of the information from your healer friend? Did he kind of guide you in the direction, or have you learned from a lot of different places?
He's been very careful with me, because he's someone who was activated by spirit, in the sense that as a child, he was running teams of horses with his father, working on the Great Pyramid. And when there were no tourists to take inside the pyramids, he would ask his father if he could take a nap. And his dad would say, sure, and he'd go nap inside the king's chamber, or nap underneath the Sphinx, there was no security back then. There was nobody to tell them not to do with it. So they would go inside the tunnels. And I asked him how many times he'd been inside the King Chamber, and he said probably 2,000 or 3,000 times. And
Wow.
there were a couple other times that he actually took naps on top of the Great Pyramid, because he would take tourists up there with his father sometimes. And they would do it so many times in the day that they would get tired, and so he would sleep up on top if he didn't have the energy to climb back down, which means the energy of the Great Pyramid is flowing through his body as like a young developing boy. And it's no wonder that somebody like that would become so activated. You know?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's literally activating. It's like you said, the spirit body, the etheric body, isn't it? So,
But
Kirsty, what were you going to say, my love?
oh, go ahead, Kirsten.
No, I was just agreeing. Yes.
Oh,
But he when I said that he was hands off, he didn't want to teach me, in the sense that he didn't want to alter my path. And so he would answer any questions that I had. And if I kind of opened something up to a discussion, then he would be happy to dive into it. But he wouldn't just straight teach me. It was very important for him to allow Egypt to, or it was very important that Egypt teaches people, in his view. Because people would come and find him, even though he worked in a papyrus shop usually. People would come and find him, or he would find them, and they would want to learn from him. And he would say, the way you learn is you go spend 2 weeks at the pyramid, or go spend months next to the pyramid, and do nothing but walk around it for hours a day, and then go home and sleep. And then do it again the next day, and the next day. The pyramid teaches you. And it sounds like a brush off, but it's not. It's the resonance. The more time you spend around the resonance, the more you figure out how it works, because you feel how it moves through you. You feel the difference in how you feel, and you begin to understand, when I'm in the grand gallery of the Great Pyramid, I feel like this. As soon as I walk into the King's Chamber, I feel the energy shift, and everything feels almost hollow, and like you can almost feel the energy, the flow going through you. And yeah, it's just really that the structures themselves do teach you the more time that you spend with them.
yeah. And so I'm just wondering how that would actually work, though, like, because is it just the concentration of energy, or do you think it's like the releasing of things, or the deepening of layers every time you go? It's like peeling another layer away.
You mean within an actual person, how it works?
Yeah.
I'll give you a perfect example of that. When I went to the Bent Pyramid, and that's the one on my Books of Stone page, I have kind of a little video where I'm panning around on X. When I did that, after that experience, it took me, I think, 3 days to sleep that off. And I met with Hosni after the third day, my friend, and I told him how long it took taking me to recover, and he said, that's because it was your first time there. And he's been there so many times it doesn't even affect him anymore. But he was saying the more you go, it's less and less. But the first time you go, you're receiving that energy and that resonance for the first time, and so you're being opened up in a very powerful way. It's very different. In subsequent times, you'll still feel it. Like I still feel it when I go in the Great Pyramid, but it just feels kind of pleasant and I don't want to say joyful, but almost, because the Great Pyramid, you feel it in your heart. So if you're in a really good space, you're going to have a really good time when you go in.
But if you're not, then it's...
If you're not, well, so the Great Pyramid is really, people love to assign a certain chakra to it. Really, it's a microcosm of the earth. So if you're going to assign anything to it, really, it's almost like the root. But that's not, the way that it works is it opens up your heart. And so when people go in there and lay in that sarcophagus, it, Kabbalistically speaking, it elevates your heart up to the world of water, the creative world of water. And so any initiations or any healing that you receive for your body are basically received at that higher level. And really, so anything that happens there is going to be at that higher level. So it's really a place where when you lay in that sarcophagus, you are laying within celestial, solar, and telluric energy fields at this convergence point of those three fields. And it's this special place that's been created basically on Earth to allow powerful initiations or healing or whatever you want to do. Is a special place that's been created inside that, I don't want to say sarcophagus, that resonance chamber there.
Yeah, so you don't think it's a sarcophagus then?
No, they're really it's a they're symbolic sarcophagi in the sense that the old version of you is dying and a new one is being reborn because of what's opening up inside of you. But the reason they've never found bodies inside them is because it's like a spiritual death, right? We were speaking before about the axis mundi and Djoser's pyramid that isn't there. Since there's no physical one, there's a spiritual one. Since there's no body in the sarcophagus, there's a spiritual body.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so easy for people to get confused about that.
Yeah, because I mean, they have found mummies in certain pyramids, haven't they? But I'm assuming it's not in the ones you're talking about.
Yeah, they found them like stuffed in the entranceways. They found them in some cases. So they think that basically what happens is people come in later and put them inside. But they weren't like the 22 pyramids, the major pyramids, I don't know a better term for them, that are in the northern part of Egypt, were meant to be used again and again as chambers of initiation. It wasn't supposed to be a burial chamber for one guy and then closed off. That's what tombs were for, you know. They had the pharaohs all had tombs or mastabas. So.
Right. Okay. But because but I'm not an expert on this at all, obviously. So that's the bit that really used to confuse me, because we could get into timescales a bit as well. It kind of just doesn't add up to me. Again, I'm not an expert on this, but it makes more sense that they've been there a really, really, really long time, and like you said, that other civilizations have come along, commandeered them, because weren't some of them completely closed at one bit?
Most of what you see, like the Sphinx as we see it now, you go around the base and around the paws and everything else. When they originally found it, it was up to the neck. So I don't know if you want to put a number on it, but maybe like 30 feet of sand were what they had to take away from the Sphinx. And the pyramids themselves were, many of them, just as a ballpark number, like 25 or 30% maybe was buried under sand. So they had to like excavate it away to get down. And in some cases that's been good though, that they were buried, because then there've been actually some casing stones found at the bottom where they were all taken and used to build houses and forts and cities and whatever else. But some of them were so buried that they were still in place and we were able to find them. But based on what I know and what can be discerned from the archaeological record, it looks like between the 6th and the 7th dynasty, so at the end of the Old Kingdom, was when the big flood came, wiped everything out, and then it was the folks who were remaining, who were a lower level of people, who were then shown trained in the Egyptian culture, shown a higher level of spirituality and everything else. It very much, I would say that the more you look into the archaeological record, the more that rings true. And even though I have this knowing inside that that's true, like it's important for me to see a physical reality that reflects a knowing whenever that's there, and it seems to.
So you've had a little kind of intuition, you've followed that, and then on your journey, and then you've kind of got hits back, is that right, in your research that have confirmed that, or?
Yeah, well, I touched on before that my background is in IT, and what I've really done is I took that same skill set and I just pointed it towards Egypt and the Western mystery tradition and everything. So it's really important for me, if I don't just accept things at face value, I need to have 2 points of confirmation. I need to know what my sources were. If something's channeled, I never take it as fact. I look at it as 80% accurate, including my own stuff, just because nobody's ever a perfectly clear channel and gets it right. And so I always try and cross-check everything. And I'm also, like, I study symbology, and that's very important to me. And it's important to me that whatever comes to me through intuition or through other guidance about Egypt, I find places in temples or on walls and in hieroglyphs that will reflect whatever that is, like in a scene. So it's not just something that's inside me, that I can see it and know that it's real, even though symbolist interpretations are always subjective. So I might see that confirmation, but somebody else can tell me that I'm wrong or they don't see it.
I mean,
well, I think that's the thing about symbols, is that we can all find our meanings in the same symbol. We can find different meanings depending on where we're at, even at different times in our lives. I think that's, and again, it speaks to that, the idea that symbols are alive, as you were saying earlier. So
Well, and speaking to that, one of the common sayings about symbols when it comes to Egypt and really any of the ancient traditions is that they meet you where you're at. And so you'll look at a symbol or a scene at one point on your journey, and you'll get the teaching that you need. But you can look at it 6 months or a year later, and you'll also get what you need, but it's something more. It's another level. And that's what's beautiful about the Egyptian hieroglyphs is they were always written with a minimum of 4 layers for the 4 creative worlds. Now, there's other places where, this is when people talk about the differences between the Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom. With the Old Kingdom, there's folks, since there are 9 aspects to the Egyptian soul, there's folks that say they can find 9 layers of interpretations within Old Kingdom hieroglyphs. I can't. I can look and find, there's always a commoner one where you look at something and say, oh, somebody is farming, and it's supposed to be just a plain scene of that. And someone else will look and say, oh, no, they're cultivating love. And someone else will look and say, oh, no, they're, using discernment to form higher learning, or, whatever it is. Everyone gets what they need out of it.
Yeah. Kirsten, have you got anything else to ask?
No, I think that's perfect. I like it.
I'm just kind of waffling on.
No, we live a good waffle. The thing is, if you were talking about ascension and stuff, but because it's kind of stuff that I've got no real idea about, Kirsten's probably got a bit more of an idea than me. It's nice to just sit and listen, because it's almost like we've pinched him, Michael, and we're just getting his own Egyptian lecture, really.
Well, and you know what? Like, there can be times when you're immersed in this type of stuff, it can be like an Egyptian lecture for me too. And that's why it's fun to continuously go deeper, because the deeper you go, you always find more. And I think the folks who get bored with Egypt are the ones, typically they'll look at just what's taught with the surface level stuff, which, for lack of a better term, is the Muggle type teachings. Like I was talking about the farming or the fishing or whatever. And you have to go to those deeper layers to find the really good nuggets.
They're hidden for a reason, aren't they? It's the same throughout all the mystery schools, isn't it? And that's kind of what makes me think that they weren't built by people just wanting to bury people. They're not just teams. Do you know?
I think the
whole
notion with was absurd. I mean, when I was a child, I knew that was absurd. Yeah, I'm gonna spend, I don't know, however they paid for it, and all this time and resource just to so you can put me in here when I'm dead. Doesn't really make sense.
For the pyramids, like, there's no way they spent all that time and money and those labor hours building that just to have something to look at, just to have essentially a big triangular statue. That's the way I look at all the temples, like, to understand the function, because it's kind of, since we can't feel a lot of the way that they function, just because the energy is different nowadays, so much of that idea is just foreign to us. So the way that I start out is, they wouldn't have gone to all this trouble, whether it's a big temple or a pyramid or whatever, for no reason, just to have something to look at. So they had to be getting something out of it. So what were they getting out of it? And then you think, like, well, what was the temple about? So, like, Hathor's temple is about the heart and creation and love. And so if you align yourself with that energy, with the idea of creation, and then you go into the temple that's about creation, that's when you have that aligned effect. But.
And this is the thing as well, like, they seem to be, we talk about the hieroglyphs as being almost living entities in their own right. It's like a living symbol, isn't it? We talked about that. But also the pyramids themselves seem like they have their own kind of personalities as well when you listen to people talk about them. And it's almost like when people go there, they're called by the pyramids, Oh, sorry, Mick, did you? Sorry. So I was just saying, it's almost like the pyramids have their own personalities as well as the hieroglyphics. They've got their own kind of, I don't know, their own spirit. And people that are more aligned, with Egypt get like this call to visit there. And I'm wondering if it's just to do with like maybe past lives or some kind of activation they need to have, or whether it's just working with the earth grid, because as we know, they're built in places of power, aren't they? Which is just, it's connected to the earth. And I'm wondering what the call is really. I ain't got the answer. It's just a speculation, but I wouldn't mind listening to both of your ideas on that.
Kirsten, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think they probably do have a bit, like I sometimes call it divas, the spirits of wherever you are. And I think every building, really everything has its own spirit. And so obviously the spirit of the pyramid would be a very powerful spirit. And I think people are called there for all of those reasons, Sam. I think they're called there because of past lives. I think they're called there because they're working with the grid. I think they're called there. I don't know. I used to, when I was a child, I could not read enough about the pyramids. I could not look at enough pictures of them. I think it seems to be especially endemic in the types of circles that we tend to to hang around in, doesn't it? I think all of my friends who really like this sort of anything esoteric are sooner or later really drawn to the pyramids. So it seems to be, and I think it probably for the entire earth, it is a center where spiritual people are, magnetized to. So yeah, go ahead, Michael. What do you think?
I think the Great Pyramid is definitely it's a magnet. People are just, they can't look away, and I think, like you said, I think many people don't know why they're drawn to it, and for many it is certainly it's a past life, like an echo. They don't know why they're there. Like I've run into a few folks. Hosni is a magnet for those people. Like that's how I met him. He just walked up next to me and started talking to me, and he can see people. I asked him actually how he knew that he could walk up next to me, and he said, Horus walks behind you. He's protecting your backside. And so he can just see those folks. And so I met a few through him. He would come and drop people off at my apartment and be like, hey, this is so-and-so. I met him in the street, but I have to work. Can you be host? And I was like, sure. And, it'd be someone from Denmark or from Finland or whatever. And this happened a few times. And I would talk to guys about why they're there, and they didn't know. They just knew that they had a calling to come there. And, but I do know from my work with Sekhmet that that's why I was called. She called me. And I know that, like her the way that I'm getting chills as I'm talking about this. She's calling her children home is basically the message that she has put out. And so people who have worked with her before in any other capacity in a previous life, that connection is going to be activated within them, and they're going to just have this calling to go back to Egypt. And for me, my first contact was with Thoth. And like the old saying is that if you are associated with a lineage in a previous life, a magical lineage, that they will find you in the astral in your next life. And that's basically what happened with me. And then it wasn't until as soon as I had decided I was going to move to Egypt, the next morning I was sitting at my altar at home and I was giving thanks to my ancestors. And all of a sudden, Sekhmet came in. And I've only communicated with Sekhmet herself a few times. Usually it's her energy. And the way that you can tell the difference is that it's like a magnet locks onto your third eye. And it's like so powerful. And it feels like your third eye is stretching out of your forehead like bubble gum. And it feels like you're locked in and like you're being pulled along. And there's nothing fearful about it. It's just the most powerful, intense pulling feeling. And, she told me, she said, come find me at Luxor and at Karnak. She said, come find me at Karnak in my sanctuary. And she said, and I will teach you. So, and she did. And that's when I moved to Luxor, I was in Cairo for a week in 2023. And then I moved to Luxor. And then it would be once a week or so. First thing in the morning, I'd wake up and she'd say, come see me at Luxor. And I'd go and she'd clear out my sacral chakra. She'd, clear fuzz out of my mind, something. And there was always a sacrifice or something that I had to do. some part of myself I didn't want to face, or that sort of thing. But yeah, and I know so many people have fear of her because she's fire personified, the fire of the sun personified. But she's always a part of you when she communicates with you. So she's communicating through you. So with me, she is pretty harsh and pretty direct because, like, it's whatever voices you have within you. I've been to boot camp, so I've had people speak to me harshly. So there's times that Sekhmet can be harsh with me. Yeah, she's never asked anything of me other than to be the best version of myself, essentially.
I think that's the important thing, isn't it, when you're communicating with anything like that? I've also had some instances where I've I'm going to call it initiators, really, because that's what she does, isn't it? She initiates you into the path of. For me, it was the priestess. I've been on the goddess path for a while, and she, she is kind of austere. Me and Kirsten both spoken about it. So she's austere, and it really did resonate. But it's kind of like the stern, loving mother. And I was crying when you were saying, because it hit me there. You called home, and I've had instances where I've worked with, Isis, Hathor, and Sekhmet more recently. And I have got kind of like these past lives that link me there. And I have got this really strong pull to go. And it's not quite time yet, but they'll tell me when. But yeah, when I've worked with Sekhmet, she's been very. It's interesting when you said they use the voices within you, because we've got friends like Stephen, and he works a lot with like Hanuman, and he's more of the what's it called, the Hindu gods, and he does the same sort of thing. And I do think with the predominant theme within all like the deities, there's kind of like a thread and a correlation between different ones, within different traditions. And it's interesting how all of them communicate differently with different people. So he's again like you, he gets a bit stern with them, aren't they? But with Kirsten and I, they tend to be a lot more firm but supportive, a bit more softer. And we don't know if that's because of our feminine energy, and you probably got more of you have probably got more masculine energy.
Hopefully.
I think there's another reason for that there, Sam. I think also because I know when people get like that with me, I just go, oh, I'm not doing any of that then. You can ask me nicely. But and I know you're a bit the same way, Sam. So
I am,
so
yeah. I've had Sarah's moon.
When they want to scold me, they usually make fun of me. That's the worst thing. They'll just make ridiculous sport of whatever it is. If I'm being dramatic or whatever, they'll be like, yeah.
Like if I'm being testy with people, they'll be, oh, look who's Mr. Tough Guy today. Oh, that type of mockery, it does work. Absolutely.
It does.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Michael, I just got chills when you said Sekhmet was bringing her children back home, and I'm getting it again. I was just like, whew. Oh my gosh, yeah, I can feel that. I'm sorry, Sam. Go ahead. What were you?
I was going to say the first time I heard that was from another spiritual healer, and it was the same thing and that was before I had a relationship with Sekhmet, but it resonated with me immediately. And it really helped me, in a way, guide me on my journey because I identified with it, even at an early stage. So
yeah,
it's interesting about Sekhmet too. There's hundreds of Sekhmet statues in Egypt, probably thousands, and there's very few of them that have her essence in them still. Though there's the one at Karnak. It's her famous statue that has people have the funny effects go on with their cameras and that sort of thing. That's the most powerful one. And then there's one at the Cairo Museum also that when I'm in the northern part of Egypt, when she asks me to come see her there, I go to that one. But there's another statue that's maybe 30 feet away from the one at the Cairo Museum it's lifeless. It has none of her energy. but I can go and have a full, powerful conversation where she can activate my third eye and whatever else at the other statue. Even though there's people around, you can still have an experience with her. That's how strong she is.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of videos of that where people have gone and been like, oh, you can see the shadows, and they have all sorts of stuff that happens. And yeah,
I've had some magical experiences there, and there's no way to explain it. The temple guards there, they take it very seriously. They respect her her power, and there's an older guy there who will let you in, and like he immediately will be like, you know, he'll like wordlessly explain all the rules. He'll like motion you in and then show you that he's going to close the door. He'll show you how many minutes you have with her, and it's all out of respect. Even though he's a Muslim and he's, you know, dressed in full galabia and everything else, but he has great respect for her. And I've had some wonderful experiences in there with her. One of the most magical experiences was actually I went in thinking I was going to meet with her alone, and the guy ushered me in there, and there were two young girls in there who were European, and I felt like they were French, but I'm not sure. And they were probably about 20, and they were sitting at Sekhmet's feet, and they were just kind of like,
my dog.
I guess it was almost like they were. It was like an adoration type thing, but it was almost like they didn't know what to do, and because they were young, and so I was just like, I just stood in front of it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to be respectful. I'm going to have my experience anyways. And after I communicated with her and had my experience, the girls, they never said a word, but one of them like waved me closer, and she just gestured at Sekhmet and at me and at Sekhmet. And then I kind of figured that, like, oh, they had no idea what they were doing, and so they wanted to see how somebody would properly show respect. And so I just loved Sekhmet like she was a woman. I just put my hand on her shoulder and across the back of her head, and I caressed the side of her face, and I just loved her to show that, you know, like, this is how you show respect. And it ended up being a really beautiful moment, one that I thought was, at first when I walked in, I felt almost like, oh no, here's two tourists that I'm going to be here with, and I'm trying to have a real experience. But it just ended up that they were new and they wanted to learn. And I didn't have a real reason to go see Sekhmet there that day, and so I actually didn't really know 100% why I was there. So really, ultimately, that's why she called me there that day, was so that I could show those two young ladies basically how to show love and respect to Sekhmet. And so that was really beautiful to kind of be used as an instrument or a tool in that way and to have that powerful experience there. So
that's really beautiful.
You never know what you're going to experience.
Really,
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, isn't it? They've got their own ideas, but there's always a divine plan.
And with her, it's interesting
Yes.
too, because I will get messages from her occasionally that are directly, but often they'll come through other people. You know, folks that I know will pop into my DMs or something like that and say, you know, hey, Sekhmet says such and such. And, you know if I have a relationship with that person or whatever, that they're a channeler, that what they're giving me is legit. But I've had, I think, 5 or 6 people at this point pass me messages from Sekhmet, and they've all been greatly helpful. Not always stuff I wanted to hear, but things that were helpful. And so it's just wonderful to see the way that she and the other deities work through other people to help us help each other and to build relationships, I guess.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. She feels very present, I'm not gonna lie.
She knows she's being spoken about.
It's all good though.
Yes.
With respect and admiration.
Now, she's been really wonderful too. Like, there's only been a few times she's ever asked me to do anything. And when she has asked me to do something, it's been to tell part of my story in a way that other people can learn from it. So she and I kind of have an agreement that I do whatever I want and I talk about whatever I want, but there have been a few times where she's nudged rather sternly, hey, you need to post this. And even though it's been something that's maybe been very personal and it's not something I would have normally talked about, I've done it just because she doesn't ask normally. And one of those moments was, I believe it was at Luxor, when she said, you know, hey, you have shame in your sacral chakra. Do you want me to clear it, for you? And has it taught you all that you needed to learn from it? And I said yes. And I actually didn't know what she was talking about. But if somebody says, hey, we'll clear out one of your chakras for you, you say, yeah, sure. So, and she, like, I felt her go through it and all, but, later on that day on social, I was nudged to post on social media about that. And that's not really something I'd prefer to talk about, but somebody needed to hear it. So I did, because she asked me to.
Yeah. And I think it's part of being in service to other people, but I think as well, because that's kind of what I was using Twitter for a long time. I'm having a bit of a sabbatical at the moment because I'm not really sure what my relationship is to it anymore. But I went through my Kundalini awakening, and it basically shook the shit out of me. And I really had to kind of reconfigure my life around that. And I'm still in the process actually of putting it all together. And it was a number of years ago. And I've been through lots of different ups and downs, because obviously when you go through an activation like that, you're shedding layers of yourself all the time. And I was like, why am I on here really? And the primary focus was always healing, but it was to share my own experience and to say that this isn't always pretty. It's not all sunshine, rainbows and unicorns. Sometimes you've got to get into the darkness. You're going to have days where you're happy. You're going to have days where you're mental. You're going to have days where, you're sat crying in an empty bath and God knows what, I used to buy a full chocolate cake and sit in the living room floor and eat it and just cry and say, anyway, give me some chocolate cake, all that stuff. And I unashamedly shared that on Twitter to show other people that the spiritual path can be whatever you want it to be. And that was kind of my reason for doing that. It's interesting.
And I think that's such an important message. I really, I think it's really important for all of us to make the point that it isn't all rainbows and unicorns. I mean, there are rainbows, there are unicorns, whatever. But
they are unicorns, and I don't hear anything against them. Go.
That's right. Leave unicorns alone. But also recognize that that's not the whole thing. And if it is, that's called spiritual bypassing, and that's not going to heal you.
Yep. And I know that I have folks once in a while that tell me, oh, you're so lucky that you can channel with Sekhmet, or that you go to Egypt on these trips. And it's so easy to look at the wonderful parts and miss the sacrifices. I haven't had a home since August 2023, or a car since June. Actually, right about now is when I sold my last car. And it's funny, because that's come up a little bit lately too, the idea of spiritual jealousy. I've been seeing people post about it on social media, and I think it's something everyone goes through, and I certainly did initially first, because early on in your journey, when you're blocked, you go on social media and you see all these people with these wonderful gifts talking about how I talk to this deity and that deity, and it can be really deflating initially, especially until you kind of embrace yourself and really get into letting things out. But what helped me to get past that was that there were two people that I was jealous of, and at some point along the line, they both ended up telling me that they were jealous of me in one way or another. And the second time somebody that I was jealous of told me they were jealous of me, I kind of realized the whole thing was kind of stupid, and I worked really hard to get away from, having those type of feelings, and instead just kind of embrace myself and what I am uniquely.
Yeah, and that's amazing. And I think we all have, like you said, we all do go through these things and you're like, oh gosh, they're having all these amazing experiences. But this is the reason why I share things on Twitter, because there's the times when you have these amazing peak experiences, but then people don't talk about crying for 2 days afterwards and not being able to get out of bed. Or like your massive tower moments where you lose your job, you get a health condition that you've got to work through, you get spiritual psychosis, which I've had more than once, and it's not fun. All these different things. It's part and parcel, and that's the thing. No two journeys are the same. And I think when you first start out, you're just looking all around, and you're like, oh, I just need to learn. But you've got no direction. And I think part of the process is finding out where you're going, because we all take a slightly different path, don't we? And then you can focus on that, and then you really start to develop.
Yeah, I really try and not judge anyone's spiritual path, because really we're always on a spiritual journey, right? Even if we don't know it. And for many of us, especially because of the times we live in, our spiritual journey is going to be maybe wholly materialistic, if not in part. Um, like right now, I don't look at what I'm doing now as my whole spiritual journey. For me, it really started back when I was doing IT work in Silicon Valley and making boatloads of money and living that life. That was really the beginning of my test, because that was when I turned away from that life and saw that it wasn't for me. But my first part of my test was living immersed in materialism, and so I know there's other people who are going through the same thing, and it's so easy to look and say, oh, well, that person should maybe be a healer or a tarot reader or whatever, and make decisions from our own perspective. But that's not for us to say. Everyone has to do their own thing, and not everyone can be spiritual healers and tarot readers. We need people who are working in all walks of life, who are at a higher level of consciousness and vibration that can spread out and be contagious. We can't all live in a little hut on top of a mountain, even if that's what we'd like to do sometimes. So.
And I mean, that's not really going to develop you necessarily, is it? And again, you were talking about the past, and I think there's so many different legs to the journey. Do you not think? And I liked what you said about, we start out with like primarily materialistic. And I think that's starting at the root, because that's where a lot of us, because obviously you need a stable root, really, in my opinion. And that is just my opinion. I know I once sent you a massive long waffle about that, didn't I? Massive long tangent. But I think this is why we start with the material aspect, because it's that safety, isn't it? It's like you said, you haven't got a home, you haven't got a car, and you're completely trusting the divine. And while it must be really disorientating and a little bit like you feel like you're blowing in the wind, like what am I going to do next? What it also does is give you the ability to be stable within yourself and find your own home within you.
Yes, but not 100% willingly, I guess would be a good way to put it. It's been presented to me as a sink or swim challenge, because really, like, that's something that, because of my particular life path, I've always had challenges with my family, and because of just general life circumstances, I've moved around a lot in general. I don't know how many times or how many places I've lived, probably at least a dozen. I had lived in California for 35 years, so I had some stability, but I've still moved around quite a lot. And because of that, I've had a lot of challenges with my root. And then I end up on this adventure living out of hotels and Airbnbs for 2 years. And yeah, it's really hard to be balanced, especially when I'm supposed to be, at the same time I'm doing that, I'm supposed to be balancing my root. And it's forced me to do it in a way where it's very self-centered in a healthy way. So instead of looking for a home outside of myself, I work very hard on being at home wherever I'm at. It's still not easy, right? There's still not I would still like to have a consistent home, and it's something that I'm working on, right? But it's been something that was a necessary part of my challenge. So for right now, like, Las Vegas is home. There's 2 Airbnbs that I basically split time between here. So I do have that sense of familiarity and that sort of thing. But there are other aspects of the root that are equally as important, if not more important. And one of them is just your inner self knowing that it's safe with you making decisions. That you're going to have money for food and rent and whatever else, and that's a complete non-worry month after month after month. And so, like, by providing myself that type of stability, then the other things are a little bit easier. But certainly it's a challenge.
It is, yeah. I think a lot of us are tested as well, because we're given these jobs. So I was chasing, because obviously depends on your particular journey, but I started out, my mum was a single parent, and we lived in a council estate, and money was tight, and I came from this like feeling of financial, instability, and that really needs an input, and I've had to really work really hard, and I kind of went the other way. I've got a couple of Capricorn placements as well, which means I can be quite materialistic and like money and success focused. And when I was much younger, I'd kind of overworked myself, because I still never seemed to have enough money. And it was this black program that was in me. I'd be working 60 or 70 hours a week, and I'd still be like, I've not got enough money to do all this stuff, and it was absolutely bonkers, you know. And then as you start to unpick that, you naturally find you're put in positions where you've got to ask yourself, what's more important, the money or your own kind of your spiritual wholeness, but just your general like health and happiness as well. Because normally we'll end up getting into a position where we have these high paying jobs. Like you were on about being an IT analyst, or you were stressed, you were overworked, you were, you know, on the brink of mania by the sounds of it sometimes, because you're like, I've got so much to do. And it's not good for us. It's like, it's the trade-off, isn't it? And that's part of trusting the universe, knowing that we are going to be looked after and that we are actually safe, and that we whatever happens, it's going to work out in the best possible way. And I think that comes from having a really stable root as well.
Yeah.
I agree. And it's important to have a stable root if you're going to, especially if you're going to live a spiritual life, because you will be so ungrounded. And, you know, it leads to psychosis. If you've got a really open crown chakra, for instance, and your root chakra is blocked, that can really cause a lot of, you got problems.
That was actually the state that I was basically in. So yeah, where everything's wide open up top and you're blocked down at the bottom. And it's tough to stay out of.
I went through the same thing. I went through the same thing, and I think it's so yeah. Yeah.
I will say though, the good part about that, because every perceived curse is always a blessing, right? Or it always hides a blessing. The wonderful part about that was that when I began my spiritual journey in earnest, I was completely ungrounded. And so I was working on developing a healthy ego the whole time. And one of the ways that was a benefit was at the same time I discovered all the Hermetic laws, natural law, and that sort of thing. And so I had this idea, what if I just took the Hermetic laws and used that as the basis for like healing and designing my new self? And so that ended up working out pretty well, because that was kind of just an educated guess, but and so that ended up helping me with alignment. But the other thing was, because I was kind of putting my ego back together, it was so easy for me to see the ego traps that other folks fall into. And so even though I struggled mightily, I missed these other struggles that other folks have gone into, like some of the tests of riches, or ambition, seeking power for the sake of, you know, lusting for more power, and those sorts of things. I was able to see that either in the teachings or in other people, and felt that I was fortunate basically to see it rather than experience it firsthand. So.
Yeah, I like what you were talking about, like the test of riches, because that's kind of what I was getting at. It is. It's are you going to sell your soul for money, basically, aren't you?
And I had one of those come up a few years ago. It was at a time when I was struggling financially, and I decided I was going to take a more spiritual path. And all of a sudden, I had a call come out of nowhere. It was for $70 an hour to do an at-home remote job, and it would have been like half-time for a year. And I jumped at it, and I said yes. And long story short, it ended up falling through at the last minute. But you know, there was a path of riches test that I failed. But that made me, since it didn't work out, it made me go back and look and say I was about to do this for the wrong reasons, because all the reasons that I left that life, this job had, you know, every single one of them, and I would have had all the same challenges. So then I went and looked at it objectively and kind of made my peace with that life and let it all go.
Yeah, and the thing is, we're human, aren't we? So when we go through these initiations, I mean, the more you go through, you can kind of see them coming. Actually, I don't know if you're the same, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
And like, oh, here we go. You can see this. What are you asking me now? And even though we know the test, sometimes we still bloody don't complete them quite as we should, because that's the whole point of a test, isn't it? But yeah, I had a point, but I've lost it. Sorry.
Well, I will say I look at one of my gifts, and this is what the gift that I brought to the IT world and really the Navy before that is I'm good at troubleshooting. And in the Navy, I was good at troubleshooting machines and fixing, you know, broken turbines. And in the military, or in the civilian world, it was with healthcare, with software. But it's the same skill set. It's figuring stuff out. And I apply that same skill set towards the tree of life and initiations and all. And so even though like I haven't gone through an initiatic order, I've just been guided by spirit and through the, you know, the old ways and all. So I haven't gone up like a straight path up the tree of life. You can kind of figure out where you're at based on some of the challenges that you're getting and the tests that you're getting. And there have been times where I've looked at, you know, the tests I've been getting and going, okay, I think I'm in the sphere of Venus right now, which means, you know, my desire nature is going to be tested, and my ability to control my inner fire and all is going to be tested. And so I will look at it from a problem solver's point of view and say like, okay, I passed this and passed this and passed this, you know, what's left? And I'll be like, oh shit, fear, you know, and I'll realize that, you know, there's something that's here, right here. And oh no, I've been having this sense of doubt and dread about it. And I know what it is. And like you said, Sam, I can know what it is or have a sense that this is what I need. There's one thing that's keeping me from stepping through this portal, but like, it's still different to overcome it. You have to overcome it the same way as everyone else, even if you recognize that that's the one thing that's holding you back.
Exactly. You've still got to walk the walk. You've just got a bit more of an expanded viewpoint, haven't you? But I think you learn to become, you learn to look for the signs. So you're more likely to know it's a test, and you're more likely to go, I'm going to be a little bit more aware here. What is it asking me? Whereas I think when you first start, because I mean, we've probably been out on a path of initiation our entire lives actually, and just not been aware of it, because that's just what we've come in to do. Every time we look back at these pivotal moments in our lives, they were all like tests, weren't they? That's kind of how I look at it. But the more aware you are, I think the more complex they get. But you can dig into it then, because you've got the capacity and the mental bandwidth to have kind of a framework and what they're asking of you, basically.
Yeah. That's one area where the Tree of Life teachings with the mystery schools have been a big help, because you can look at you've got the 10 Sephiroth, and then you've got the 22 paths, and you can look at where the tarot cards are at and the Sephiroths, and you can figure out kind of where you're at. And probably the biggest help on my journey has been, there's a book called The True and Invisible Rosicrucian Order by Paul Foster Case, and he basically lays out the whole path of enlightenment, the Rosicrucian path of enlightenment, with a somewhat abbreviated path workings for each of the 22 paths also. And it's quite a thorough book, and it's kind of been almost like the backbone of my journey. And I'll get nudges from my spirit team that'll just be like, I'll hear Gabura, and I'll go to that book and I'll look up the chapter that's on Gabura, and I'll flip through and nope, and then I'll just know that I'm on the right page, and then I'll end up seeing in that part of, like, one of the path workings for that sphere will be the exact solution of whatever problem that I'm working on, you know, whatever circumstance I'm dealing with at that time. And there's times where day after day I would get nudged to go back to that book, because that book really does have every teaching in it. So it's been invaluable for me, even though I don't follow that path specifically.
I mean, it's good when you do find those kind of reference points, isn't it? And I do feel like we're guided there by spirit. And so what I found is, whenever I go back to tarot cards, and I'm not proficient at them at all, I like dabble for a little bit. But whenever I'm doing that, I get a lot of messages from spirit in the form of tarot cards, basically. And they'll get me to go and have a look at it, and I'll say, oh my God, and it's like I'm discovering new bits all the time. And that's kind of how they're teaching me, you know. And they do communicate through symbology the more aware you are, and they want you to build up this kind of almost like a dictionary of symbols, because it's so much easier to say, oh, they'll send you a bird, or because I know you work with animals as well, Kirsten, don't you? You get lots of bird messages, and it's building up that kind of internal lexicon, and that's, for me, how you develop the language to work more deeply with the spirit guides, basically.
And the symbology that's in tarot. Oh, go ahead, Kirsten. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, the more you learn to identify the symbols, the more you'll see them, and the more messages you'll get. And so it is kind of just creating a language for them to speak to you. Like, okay, I'm going to look at this book, like you were talking about, Michael. And so they'll guide you to the right place in that book that'll give you the message you need. Or I'm going to listen to songs on the radio, or I'm going to listen to the wren that's singing outside my window right now. And you can tell me. So, yeah, it's. Go ahead, Michael. What were you going to say?
Well, along those same lines, I have my tarot deck with me. It's usually in my backpack with me when I go to work at coffee shops and that sort of thing. And I don't just use it for readings. I'll just pull up, I'll crack the deck and say, like, ask Spirit for one card to help me focus, or, to help direct my focus while I'm learning. But there are other times I'll just pull cards just to pull cards. And for me, I don't go off of the traditional meanings. I go off of the symbolism, the message that's being conveyed. And it goes hand in hand with the Egyptian teachings. And in fact, the Rider-Waite deck comes from, Waite was a known occultist and a very knowledgeable guy, even though he wasn't very well liked by his peers. And that a tarot deck can, according to legend, basically, that's all that you need. For ascension, that there's enough there to draw out the meanings of the symbols from the collective wisdom. And for me, that's been true in the sense that it's helped me to progressively open up my own understanding, and I use it daily, basically, as part of my own journey. And the symbols that are there, they're timeless, and they really do. They essentially prepare you for the initiations, which is kind of what you were alluding to earlier, Sam. And then you would go to a pyramid temple or that sort of thing, and then it would proceed with an activation or open something up, blossom something from inside you.
Yeah, I just want to probably going to bring it to a close shortly because it's getting a little bit late here. But I just kind of want to talk a little bit about your own path of initiation and some of the things you've experienced, because I know. I like what you said about you've not been initiated into a natural order, because neither have I. Not officially, but whatever. So it's like everything that I've experienced has been through spirit and kind of meditation or almost like trance states. I'm wondering if you've had something kind of similar happen to you.
Yep, I've had. I've had a lot of initiations, but they've been all in the astral, basically in my backyard, or, and they've been, especially when I was in Texas before I went to Egypt, they would be basically like surprise initiations. I would have Thoth in my ear, and he would say, "Go load up your bong and smoke an entire bowl and go out in your backyard." And there were times that would happen at like 6:30 in the morning. There were times that I was asked to smoke 2 bowls at 6:30 in the morning, and I would go into my backyard and have an initiation that lasted like 1 minute and 30 seconds, and then just be toast for the whole day because I would be so stoned. But there was a purpose to it. It was to create the fluidity to allow me to have the initiation. But yeah, and I would have some, and I won't say what they were, just in case somebody else has a similar initiation. But I had one where I was just shown 4 tarot cards in my mind with no instructions whatsoever. And I'm like, am I supposed to arrange them? Am I supposed to pick my favorite one? Am I, and so yeah, I've had those type of tests. I had another one where it was my ancestors and I don't know, I guess ascended masters, and I could just feel this massive presence. And they said, choose your magical name. And I put no thought into it whatsoever. And it's just me sitting in my backyard in front of basically everybody, spiritually speaking. And like that was another one of, that I've had. But these are all within like my waking imagination. And you do feel when they're happening, you do feel like, is this real? How much of this is, coming from me? But eventually you go through enough of them that you understand that they do produce a psychological and physiological and spiritual effect within you. And so they're real in that sense. And yeah, and you can feel the way that they progress. So you are on a journey, whether you are in an order or not. And I think what I've learned, and this is what I was strongly guided to do this, was you can do the guided version for a while, but there's a point where you have to make a structured path a priority. and that you have to be leading. It has to be like a co-creation. They don't want to. The way that it was explained to me was they don't want a parent-child relationship. It's your journey, and you have to be the one making the decisions. And so that's how I ended up with the Rosicrucian path, even though it's not my path. You know, Rosicrucians go back to the Templars, which go back to the King Solomon's temple, and eventually it all comes back to the Egyptian teachings and the Sufis and that sort of thing. And so even though the teachings are Rosicrucian, they still trace back to Egypt. And so I can get the same structure from the Rosicrucians, even though it's not the Egyptian path maybe that I would prefer.
Yeah.
So I ended up there.
Is there anything else you want to ask, Kirsten?
Probably, but I probably won't think of it till later. So
That's usually how it works with me also.
Normally in the toilet for me. Like, what is that? And I go in the toilet and I'm like, oh yeah.
It's where all of our best thinking happens, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I could make a terrible joke there, but I won't. It did involve shit. Anyway, on that note. Michael, on that note, is there anything you want to say before we kind of wind this to an end? Tell people where we can find you. Any final thoughts?
You can find me. My main account on X is @metaltriple, and then I put most of my Egyptian hieroglyphs and those sorts of teachings on @Books of Stone, which is also on X, and then I'll have more developments in that direction in the future.
Awesome.
All right, we'll put that in the description too, so people can see it.
Well, I've loved talking with you guys.
Yeah, it's been great having you on. Thank you so much.
Well,
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us, and thank everyone for watching. And happy solstice.
Happy solstice.
Happy solstice.
My birthday is in 4 days, so almost happy birthday for me.
Happy birthday!
We'll send you pictures of the cake.
Right before the new moon. The new moon happens like right after my birthday, so it's a big new moon for me.
Oh wow!
Interesting. Anyway, right.
Okay.
But thank you ever so much for coming on, Michael. We'll probably pull you back on actually because I'm sure we can pick your brains further about the Egyptian mysteries. But yeah. We'll catch you on the flip side. Thanks for calling.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.